Welcome into a chat with Husker247 here, and we have Allen Trieu from 247Sports joining us. Allen has been with 247Sports for several years now, one of our great recruiting analysts, covers the Midwest, and someone that I routinely had on a daily radio show, one of my favorite guests. And so I figured if I was starting up a video chat format, who better to have for the first guest than Allen Trieu? Allen, welcome.
Hey, I am honored to be one of the first video guests here.
Yeah, I figured people got tired of just hearing my voice and they really needed to see me to get the full experience. And so, I think that's what the people want.
I can't imagine the amount of subscribers that are going to add, or people who are going to subscribe once they know they get to see your face and mine. I mean,
Yeah.
What more could you ask for? Plus, and you get Paramount Plus on top of that. Like, why not?
Yeah, that's incredible. What could be better? What could be better? Maybe we'll find a way to work some Oasis in for you. I know you always enjoyed that sound drop we had for you, but we'll see if we can get that done. So I wanted to have you on today to jump into all things recruiting. And before we dive into Nebraska specifically, I wanted to ask if you can kind of see early on any significant differences beyond just being able to have recruits on campus between the 22 and 23 recruiting cycles right now. I know that for me locally, it's been very different with Nebraska, but I'm curious for you as someone who covers the Midwest region, how things have kind of looked just comparing and contrasting those cycles so far right now in March.
I think the biggest thing is that recruits know based on 2022 that they're going to have less time to make a decision and that spots might fill up sooner. And maybe they had a teammate or somebody who they knew, who they followed, who waited too long in the last cycle and ended up. We had guys who had Power 5 offers have to accept preferred walk-ons because spots filled up and there was less scholarships to go around. And a lot of guys at the college level got their years back and schools filled up with transfer portal as well. So I think the 23 kids seeing that understand maybe I don't have the amount of time to go through this process that I thought I did. I've already heard some guys who are even top level guys saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to take all of my officials. So I think you're going to see a larger amount of this class committed by the time summer starts than you did in previous years. And a lot of that is kids wanting to hold their spots and not have it taken up by somebody else or a transfer portal guy or whatever it may be. I think that's the biggest change right now.
Absolutely. You mentioned the transfer portal. Obviously, that's been around for a while. I mean, and transfers aren't anything new in college football, but we certainly saw an explosion of it in this 2022 recruiting cycle. What was sort of your takeaway from the 2022 recruiting cycle as it relates to the transfer portal? Do you think that this is going to be a continuation of sort of what we saw with, places like Nebraska basically left 10 spots open for transfer portal players, and other schools around the country did similar? Do you think this will be continued, or do you think this is going to ebb and flow a little bit and really be dictated based on class size and everything else for a school, kind of where they are at in their track and trying to compete?
I think in the near future, it's not going anywhere, and it's not going to the way that the last cycle played out, I think, is how the next few cycles will play out. And then any changes beyond that, I think, will result from if the NCAA decides to legislate things differently, if any rules changes happen around recruiting and around the portal, or if schools start to find out that maybe the portal isn't as fruitful as we think it is. And, there's more benefit to taking on a high school kid that we can develop for 4 or 5 years in our system. But I think as it stands right now, when you look at the success that schools have had in taking transfers, there's no reason for them to stop right now when you can see even within the league in the Big Ten, Iowa taking a guy from Hillsdale like Zach Van Valkenburg turns out to be an all-conference guy. Michigan State taking a guy like Kenneth Walker. Why wouldn't you keep trying to do that? So until those guys stop having success, I don't see why schools would revert to anything different at the moment.
Before we dive into 2023, one last thing with 2022. There's a couple guys from the Midwest area that I know that you covered their recruitments, and I believe you actually covered both of their commitments, that are probably as close to off the radar in the 2022 class for Nebraska as anybody, and that's Jaleel Martin and Emmett Johnson. And if you could just kind of walk through both of those guys, neither enrolled early, Both will arrive sometime in late May and June, and each has sort of a unique route as ending up as part of Nebraska's class.
Yeah, so I think when you look at Nebraska's 2022 class, and maybe wasn't ranked as highly as the others in previous cycles, but if a Jaleel Martin or an Emmett Johnson turns out, suddenly it really elevates the class. And I think Jaleel is, first of all, one that could do that because I see a lot of upside there, but I see also the reasons why he wasn't more heavily recruited or maybe more highly ranked. And part of that is that they didn't play a fall season his junior year. He had a really shortened spring season, and then they were supposed to have 6 games, and then due to a number of different factors, didn't even play all 6 of those. Then he starts off the next season in the fall, and he's got a big club on his hand for the first few weeks. And I had seen him work out before, and there was even some process there of figuring out what he was. He was a wide receiver early in his career. There was some talk that they would even need to move him to quarterback to fill the spot of a kid that was graduating. Kind of settled in eventually I think at the college level, he's a defensive prospect. And even with that, there's still some ambiguity. But I think that when you have a kid that's that big and that versatile, has played that many different positions, and it has worked really hard, I think he's a guy who can turn around and outplay his ranking just because of all of those factors. And then with Emmett Johnson, I think you trust the evaluation and you trust the production. He was outstanding as a senior, was really good as a junior, but then kicked it up to even another notch as a senior. And I think you have to say, well, being up there at Holy Angels, which, a smaller school in Minneapolis, not a place that a lot of schools got to. And then with the COVID year of not being able to travel and get to some camps, he fell under the radar. But when you put up that many yards and then did it again in an all-star setting against some of the best players in the state, I think he also has a chance to greatly outplay his rankings and his offer list and his expectations.
Do both of those kind of represent the next frontier of recruits where Jaleel Martin could play multiple different positions on defense by the time his career ends? Emmett Johnson could play on either side of the ball, and that was one of the first things that he told me. Both seem like they could be really involved in special teams. It just feels like teams like Nebraska are coveting versatility more and more with recruits, and both of those guys reflect it to me.
Yeah, I think, and you see it at every level. When we go back and look at some of the guys in the NFL draft that we missed, it's typically something like that. Zaven Collins, who runs for a gajillion yards as a high school running back, but not really sure if he's a running back. And then he goes to Tulsa and plays linebacker and becomes a first-round pick. I think, even the Isaiah Simmonses of the world are kids that kind of fell into that tweener trap that I think used to be kind of a taboo word in scouting. Now it's a good thing. I think if you don't play multiple positions, I think that there's something wrong. So that's what we saw last year with Nebraska's class as a whole. When we looked at Ernest Hausman and guys like Gage Stenger, who played all over the field, played both sides of the ball. I think now if you're going to project over the defense and you don't play offense, there better be a really, really good reason for that. Otherwise, that's a little bit of a red flag in evaluating, just because of the amount of athleticism you want to have on the field as a defense now.
Transitioning over to the 2023 recruiting class. Right now, Nebraska sits at 5 commits. I think the last time I looked, they were inside the top 15 in the 247Sports team rankings. I think they're number 5 in the Big Ten recruiting rankings. They're back in more of the territory where Scott Frost and this staff has kind of been relative to that 2022 cycle, where they were as low as 73rd at one point in time. And even a year ago at this time, they didn't even have a commitment yet for 2022. And it was a really slow burn. They're at 5 right now. And several of those guys are right here in the region. Do you have you had a chance to kind of look at a guy like Gunnar Gatula or Sam Sledge, Ben Bramer, some of their in-state guys that Nebraska was able to get early commitments from?
Yeah, I think those guys still have some runway to go up. Those guys were evaluated pretty early by us, and this was without the benefit of having seen those guys in person a lot yet. So I think we're hoping to be able to do that. I'm getting out into that area coming up. There's some big events in Kansas City, and that we're hoping to see those guys. And then we'll be back on campus for Nebraska this summer. So you hope maybe those guys pop in to a Friday Night Lights or something and work out at one of those things. So I think at this point in time, we're pretty conservative with the rankings. We like to trend guys up rather than having to move them down. And I think all of those guys especially a guy like Brammer, who is continuing to grow into his body, has a lot of athleticism and kind of fits. We just talked about some of the guys on defense that have versatility. Well, he's a high school wide receiver, multi-positional guy, could depending on how he fills in, be a lot of different things, maybe a tight end eventually there. I think as we see him develop, I think guys like him have a chance to really move up.
Yeah, you mentioned being conservative with the rankings with people you haven't seen in person yet. One in-state player that you have not been conservative with the rankings is Malachi Coleman, who's deep inside the top 247. I think he's inside the top 150 players here on our latest rankings update. I've seen Malachi Coleman several times in the last year, and it was really fun just watching him go from early on, slowly getting better, getting better, getting better. We just talked about versatility. Malachi Coleman's a guy that could play like 4 or 5 different positions as well. What have you kind of seen when you turned on the film, and then you pair that up with what his track times have been and just the overall athleticism of a Malachi Coleman, who's transcended being maybe a regional recruit and is bordering on being a national one at this point?
Yeah, I think with him, it's exciting because if you look into the future, you look into the crystal ball, to use our a term from our network. In the future, in 5 years, if he's we got the NFL Combine this week, he could be working out with the receiver group, he could be working out with the tight end group, he could be an edge rusher, he could be a linebacker. There's all sorts of different things that he could be based on his athleticism and the growth still that he could have at 6'5", 190 pounds. So that was exciting to watch a guy with that frame. I think show the twitch that he had and then match that up, like you said, with some of the track data. This is how our rankings work. Usually I watch through all my regional guys and I'll take a few and say, hey, I think these guys have a chance to fit somewhere nationally. I send it off to them, and sometimes they say, you're wrong, keep him at an 87, or they'll say, no, I think this guy fits in. And with him, it came back that we think this guy might be a top 150 to 200 guy. And at that point, I didn't really know a ton about Malachi. I just knew that I liked his film and liked some of the data we had. And they felt like comparing him to nationally, which is a perspective I don't get, he fit into that. And a lot of that is upside. It's not just that what he is right now. I think it's what he could be down the line.
Absolutely. Diving into Nebraska's got a big visit weekend coming up. The March 5th here on Saturday. They're going to host their 3rd junior day. They have somewhere in the neighborhood of 13, 14 guys on campus in 2023 that already have offers. A lot of regional guys. Certainly, the Malachi Coleman is one of them. Maverick Noonan is another. And then they have some guys from the state of Missouri. Missouri has been unbelievably barren for Nebraska over the last 4 years. It's a state where there's a number of great Huskers that have come through that played in Kansas City or played through St. Louis, and they just have not landed those commitments. And it's not necessarily for a lack of effort. They just haven't had luck there. Right now, you're looking at a visit weekend with a guy like Paris Patterson or Brandon Henderson or Logan Reichert, all come from the state of Missouri. What has Missouri expanded in your mind in terms of producing more and more recruits? One, because it feels like more schools go into it now than ever. And two, what do you know about any of those guys individually? I think there was another defensive back that I left off from St. Louis as well that I believe you just wrote about.
Yeah, Donovan McIntosh. So I think there has been a little bit of a boom in St. Louis over the last couple of years. Ezekiel Elliott, I think, helped usher that in, where schools kind of went, maybe we should be going in there more. And then there was this that class a few years ago, I think, where Illinois came in and signed Isaiah Williams, and there was Shaman Cooper and Jamison Williams was in that class. That really helped kind of push St. Louis recruiting forward. And so I think partially why Nebraska maybe hasn't had the success that they've wanted, like you said, is that all of a sudden everybody was going in there. There were a lot of sharks circling the water, a lot of schools going in there, and not everybody could have success. I think that slowed down a little bit, and I think the kids are, looking more at different schools like Nebraska. I think when you look at that class that I mentioned, a lot of those guys didn't visit Nebraska. Now they've got guys visiting from St. Louis and East St. Louis, which is really an extension of St. Louis, this weekend. So I think they're gaining some traction there. And I think the kids are more open to some of those programs now. So I think getting a foothold, a pipeline into East St. Louis, even to where you can get those guys on campus, is big. And I really like Paris Patterson and Brandon Henderson. I said earlier this year, Miles McVay is the big headliner in that group. He's got a ton of offers. But I felt like when you watch them, Paris Patterson and Brandon Henderson are right there with them. At the time, Henderson had no offers. Paris maybe had 2 or 3. And I didn't think that you watched them next to McVay and said, well, this guy has 30 offers and these other guys should have 3 between the two of them. So they've now caught up. And I think schools are figuring out that they've got a factory going on over there. And I think Nebraska being in fairly early for both of those guys, especially Henderson, is going to help them in those recruitments. Same thing with Donovan McIntosh. Hasn't gotten real far into the process yet. And Nebraska is going to be one of the first schools that he really has a chance to kind of take in a whole junior day type experience at. I think that's going to go a long way in them possibly landing him.
So we just ran through Missouri, an area where picking up a guy like Jaleel Martin, do you sense that Nebraska has put more effort into Chicago? They took Alante Brown a few years ago. Marcus Buford has a connection, I believe, to Alante Brown. And so it feels like they have pushed more into Illinois as of late. And specifically, Kenwood Academy has several guys in the 2023 class and beyond that Nebraska has shown quite a bit of interest in.
Yeah, I think those guys were kind of the first dominoes that helped them sort of kick the door down. And, Chicago is another area like St. Louis where it's so dense and it's hard to get around in Chicago. I mean, with traffic and the amount of high schools that are there, and then really some of the top talents being at suburb schools that are an hour to an hour and a half outside of the city, it can be kind of hard if you don't have some ins. And I think with Alante Brown and Marcus Buford, that has helped Nebraska continue to move forward in that area. And Kenwood has been good to them. They landed Jaleel, and I think that's helped them kind of get in on the ground floor with guys like Khalil Tate, and Kavion Thunderbird, who have ended up becoming, 2 of the top guys in that state. So I do think that I see them moving forward more in those states. Another thing to mention with the East St. Louis guys that I kind of forgot about is I think when you look at this 23 class, Nebraska's made some staff changes, and that's going to be a big kind of tail of the tape of this recruiting class, especially at the offensive line position, where I've noticed they have a really, really good group coming in this week. You got a new offensive line coach. I think this is a real chance for him, already doing a good job to get these guys on campus. Now you get a chance to really spend some time with these kids and establish a relationship.
Yeah, absolutely. Donovan Raiola is definitely going to be under a microscope for Nebraska, and he's got a Chicago connection as well, having worked for the Bears the last few years. I want to finish up with Alante Brown. People might have forgotten this. You were sort of the guy that was pushing Alante Brown back in the 2020 class. You knew him from his time in Chicago before he went to St. Thomas More. Alante Brown had about as big of a breakout in the spring press conference as one could have, with almost every coach mentioning him, all the way down to the special teams coordinator. What do you remember about him, both as a high school and as a prep player? And do you kind of get excited waiting to see when these kids have that breakout moment, when you were able to follow that recruitment for as long as you have?
Yeah, especially when I think we were the only ones that had him as a 4-star. I definitely have been sitting there going, okay, come on now, let's help me out here. But I think what I remember of him is his breakout was really as a quarterback at Chicago Simeon. They came out and they played Cass Tech in Detroit. It was this big showdown game, and not a lot of people knew Alante at that point. We left that game. The Cass Tech coaches still to this day and talk about like having to stop him. And it took a minute for schools, I think, to figure out what he was. I think he was committed to Miami, Ohio for a moment they were talking about quarterback. Then he went to some camps, caught the ball, they timed him, and he started to pick up traction as an athlete, offensive weapon, wide receiver kind of guy. And so I think between all of that, not having the positional background at wide receiver, it's not a huge surprise that it's maybe taken him until this point to really start to have these breakout moments, because he was a quarterback for most of his high school career. And even though he went out to St. Thomas More, I think that was another situation where you watch that film and a lot of the time he's just the best athlete on the field. That was a lot of his high school and prep career. So I think it's been an adjustment process for him, but knowing the type of speed and explosiveness that he has, I'm not surprised that he's found a way to make an impact here. I'm excited to see that, but he was a guy that, because of the positional differences in high school, probably needed a little bit of time to adjust to this level.
Absolutely. Allen, we appreciate your time as always. We hope to have you on here again. And of course, I'm going to be hitting you up, looking for your help trying to wrangle some of these kids after Nebraska's big junior day on Saturday.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I have nothing else to do Saturday night, but but talk
Great.
about
I love that.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
fantastic.
Yep.
That's
So
fantastic.
I'll look forward to being on the board.
All right, Alan, I appreciate it. Everyone, be sure to check out Husker247. We'll have plenty of coverage of that junior day and plenty of everything else with spring football rolling here as Nebraska has it going in March. We'll catch you next time.